candidates for Florida House District 101 in South Broward. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Steve Bosquet, the opinion editor at the Sun Sentinel. We're happy to have all three of you, Hillary Cassel, Todd Delmay, Clay Miller. Hillary Cassel, refresh our memories. Is this an open primary, or is there a Republican in this race?
There is a Republican in this race.
Okay, so this is a closed Democratic primary, open to Democratic voters only, right?
Correct.
Hillary, what? I'm going to ask all the candidates to keep your comments concise. I'll raise my hand if I think you're running on a little bit. Tell me, Hillary, what most distinguishes you from the other candidates in this race as a Democrat?
Sure, Stephen. First and foremost, thank you for this opportunity. Having never envisioned running for office, this is a bit of a surreal moment for me. So thank you for giving us this chance to talk about our platforms and what makes us different. And I think for me, the simple answer is experience. You know, as a practicing attorney for the last almost 16 years, I have developed a skill set that is desperately needed in Tallahassee to push back against the extreme Republican agenda. That has been advocating, debating, negotiating, reading, applying, interpreting laws. I go up against some of the biggest, bullies in the business world, in the courtroom, insurance companies. And I fight for everyday Floridians. I've been fighting for my constituents in that capacity for benefits that they have paid for, that they have worked for, to protect their single, most oftentimes only asset, their home, against insurance companies who underpay and wrongfully deny claims. And seeing that firsthand in the courtroom, I knew I needed to bring that fight straight to Tallahassee to make sure consumer voices were heard, that reforms that were necessary to right the ship of a crisis that we are in the property marketplace, but that a consumer advocate was there making sure that the reforms that were passed were still going to give them that opportunity. I have had a front row seat in Tallahassee for the last 4 years, not only in the property insurance space, but when you sit there and you listen to committee meeting after committee meeting for years, and you're engaged in the process behind the scenes, and you're working with legislators, I have the opportunity to learn of all of the issues where not only do we have a broken insurance market, we have a broken education system, a broken unemployment system, a broken healthcare system, and we need somebody with the skill set who not only knows the law, that's my profession, to know the law, to understand the law, and how to advocate. You're on mute, Steve.
I'm sorry about that. Thank you very much. And tell us, as an attorney, you represent consumers against insurance companies, right?
That's correct. I've done that for the past 8 years.
Briefly, why is it important for voters why is that important as a candidate?
It's extremely important because first and foremost, I fight for everyday Floridians. I fight for everyday Floridians in their time of greatest need, usually after catastrophic losses such as hurricanes that devastate our state, that we know it's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when the next one happens. And I give a voice and fight for injustices, which is what we see every single day happening in Tallahassee. And
That's okay. All right. I'm sorry. Finish the thought always, please. Yes.
No, and it's important for them to understand that I'm already doing the work fighting for the little guy and girl against big business that we know in Tallahassee has a stronghold because of their influence there. And I take them on in the courtroom and I win. There's a reason why I'm an AV preeminent lawyer. There's a reason why my peers and judges have voted me consecutively for the past 8 years as a rising star and a super lawyer in this state. There's a reason why I've been named a top insurance attorney, not only in the country, but in the state of Florida and in this county. It's because not only do I fight for what's right and for justice, but I'm really good at it.
Okay. Todd Delmay, what distinguishes you from your two opponents?
Well, thank you as well for having me. I'm perhaps best known because my husband, Jeff, and I were one of the 6 same-sex couples that sued for the right to marry in Florida, the largest civil rights win we've had in recent memory. And when the judge lifted her stay, we and another couple from the case were the first ever married in Florida, the first from Broward. But I've also been a small business owner in the travel industry for over 20 years, specializing in hotel bookings and the software that we developed. I was director and area director of BNI Broward, a business networking organization, for 10 years. I serve on a number of boards and committees for everything from youth services to the Downtown Hollywood Business Association and the Chamber of Commerce, and the city's Sustainability Advisory Committee, most recently as its chair. In Hollywood, I've helped pass environmental initiatives, consulted the city on expanding healthcare access for employees as part of improving our municipal equality index from 49 to 100. I'm working on an update to our tree ordinance to encourage more tree canopy, and a rewrite of our non-discrimination code in housing to finally include women. I have a 12-year-old son that attends a Florida public school. My husband and I have been together almost 20 years, and of course, we live in Hollywood.
Did you grow up in Hollywood?
No, I grew up in Michigan. I have lived in South Florida for 25 years. We've lived in Hollywood since 2004.
All right. Thank you very much. Clay Miller, what distinguishes you from the other two candidates in this race?
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me, Hillary and Todd. Good to see you. And thank you to the Sun Sentinel at a time when our free press is under attack and our local newsrooms are being shuttered. I know our community really benefits from you taking the time to go through this process. I'm in this race because of the future of our home. I'm born and raised in this community in a working class union family. I attended our public schools, Go Bulldogs, and I feel privileged that I got to grow up in these neighborhoods, on these streets in District 101. But let's look at the reality. We are losing generations of future Floridians because of what is happening in Tallahassee. We are seeing costs that are so prohibitive that families can't lay down roots here. Inaction on climate change is making it so that we cannot be sure that we have a sustainable environment for people to ever buy a home. And most importantly, the blatant authoritarianism and extremism of Ron DeSantis and the Republican legislature is embarrassing our state on the national stage and disenchanting people of all ages from wanting to stay here, wanting to make this their home. Young talent isn't going to want to remain in Florida. People from, recent college graduates to retirees aren't going to want to move here. And as someone who was born and raised in this district, who loves it with every fiber of their being, we need someone who takes that perspective and is going to go to Tallahassee and be a staunch advocate for both our short-term needs and building power for a long-term future. I believe I'm the right candidate to do that. I've been working for the last 5 years on the front lines of the most important issues facing Broward County in my work as a legislative director for County Commissioner Beam Fur. We have worked on everything from affordable housing to climate change to solid waste and much more. I know the details and I know how to work across governments and agencies to get things done. I could get things done better than other young candidates usually can, while still providing a much needed fresh perspective and new voice in Tallahassee. We cannot continue to be myopic and just look in the short term. We need someone who is ready to address these long-term challenges. I'm prepared and ready on day one, but I also have a larger vision. And I believe that is a unique perspective that would genuinely add something.
Okay. I've got a question for Todd Delmay. Todd, as a business owner, as a community leader, as somebody who's been active in a lot of areas, and you're in Hollywood. We all know that Clay Miller's boss, Beam Fur, represents most, if not all, of Hollywood. Have you ever had occasion to reach out and to need the services of Commissioner Beam Fur's office?
I have not.
How about you, Hillary?
I have not.
Okay. I'm going to open the floor to my colleague, Martin Dykeman's got his hand up.
I'd like all three of you to answer this particular question, but I'll start with Ms. Cassel, because in her questionnaire, you propose an elected insurance commissioner. We had one before, and the insurance company has pretty much wound up owning him. In fact, so how do you contemplate electing an insurance commissioner in a time when it is impossible, has proved impossible for the state to regulate and limit campaign contributors. Right now, we have a governor who just 2 weeks ago accepted a $10 million contribution from one person. What's going to keep that out of the insurance commissioner's race?
Sure, Martin, and thank you for that question. I think the reality of the situation is what we have currently is really no different. We have an insurance commissioner that's appointed by our chief financial officer, who's also elected. So what I think having an elected insurance commissioner does is bring some more transparency to the office, where there's a requirement that you report back to your constituents. Right now, what we have is an insurance commissioner who, if you review his CV and resume, it's pretty obvious the side of the aisle that he sits on. And at least with an elected insurance commissioner, you've got to report back to the citizens. You owe explanations to constituents. And right now, that information with regards to why rate filings are being approved, why when we so, advocate for reforms that are, or advocate in opposition to reforms that have been proposed to changes to policies that would result in high out-of-pocket expenses for consumers at a time where they can't afford it, that when that fails in Tallahassee, which reforms like that nature have failed due to advocacy that I have brought to Tallahassee already, the insurance commissioner goes ahead and rubber stamps it. So what we see is, if we compare our state to, say, Louisiana, who has an elected insurance commissioner who investigated claims handling procedures of insurance companies after devastating hurricanes hit that state, we saw an insurance commissioner who saw firsthand how insurance companies were poorly treating and mishandling claims, and fined 5 insurance companies, 3 of those being based here in Florida. We currently do not have an insurance commissioner who pushes back against the insurance company and who owes any explanation to the people of Florida. And at least with an elected insurance commissioner, we know financial donations and how they operate, but at least there is reporting back to consumers and that transparency that's required. And right now, the only transparency we have is the few times a year he testifies before the House and Senate and gives a one-sided narrative to a really complicated problem.
Well, I have a follow-up question. How would you structure this office? Would you add an insurance commissioner back to the elected cabinet, or you would?
I think that's where an insurance commissioner needs to go. We can see just how far this crisis impacts the state. It's not just about current homeowners and whether or not they can afford their premiums or have access to affordable insurance, but it's also affecting our rental and our affordability issues when it comes to affordable housing. Renters that may be in a position to buy a home can't, because they can't afford the insurance. Seniors on fixed incomes who rates continue to increase as a result of reinsurance companies that are unregulated by the state of Florida because they're global companies. We're seeing seniors having a difficult time staying in the homes they've lived in for years and built their families in. So this goes far beyond just an insurance crisis for those people that own homes. It prevents fulfilling that American dream of being able to buy one. And it needs to be a position with more transparency. And I don't believe we currently have that.
Other candidates?
Go ahead, Todd. Go ahead.
Well, I haven't had time to, thoroughly, consider that particular option of going to an elected commissioner. But I think the problem that we would see is, of course, where the money and where those contributions go to. And I think it's perfectly reasonable and acceptable that the people should have an understanding of who is funding them. But I think it goes to a greater issue here in politics, that there is so much money that comes from special interests, and we've not been able to get our hands around that. In my race, for example, I have been very cognizant of being a first-time candidate and knowing that in order to get elected, I've had to go out to small dollar donors. I actually have an internship class, and we just were talking about this, and we looked at another elected who in their initial term when they were running were able to raise a lot of money from small dollar donors. They were talking to their friends and family, getting their community to support them. But in their reelection, suddenly those small dollar donors were gone, and it was all of the lobbyists in Tallahassee. So I think if it were to go to an elected position, there also has to be, as part of that, is a transparency in where money is coming from, because despite having it all listed on a website, very few people know really how to look that up and understand how and who is funding our candidates.
So
Go ahead, Clay. Yes, same question. Yep.
thank you so much.
Should we have an elected insurance commissioner?
Yes, I think there's a good case for one. I believe that since this is an issue that affects residents who are homeowners, they deserve to have a chance to make the decision in this race. I agree the same way with an elected education commissioner. But the problem is, before we address those issues, as Todd said, we have to address campaign finance reform. And I appreciate what Todd said, but I don't think it got all the way to the corrosive and debasing effects that money in Tallahassee has had on our democracy. If you look at the average campaign report for any of these PACs, they have a mysterious name, and you're seeing $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 contributions to groups with other mysterious names, who then pass it along to other groups with mysterious names. If you're the average person, the average voter who's wanting to see how money and influence is traded in Tallahassee, it is corrosive, as I said, to our democracy. And I'm proud to be a candidate who does not have a political committee. I think we should examine the donations that all candidates have made through their political committees in this race. And I think that when it comes to truly changing the system in Tallahassee, it's important for all three of us to be accountable and to put our money where our mouth is, so to speak, on campaign finance reform and creating a fair democracy.
Okay, I've got a follow-up question for that. Thanks for bringing that up, Clay Miller. Hillary, you've got a PAC, Friends of Hillary Cassel. It's gotten a number of $5,000 donations, which are above the $1,000 limit that you have as a candidate. Why is it necessary to have a committee like this? And is Clay Miller right that these things are debasing our politics?
So sure, Stephen, thank you for that question. You know, despite being a first-time candidate, because of the work that I've done in Tallahassee against insurance companies, I have a very different target on my back. And my opponents know that, in light of the fact that my opponents, several, have reached out to insurance companies thinking that that would be my Achilles heel. And when an article is published about you 3 months into your race as a first-time candidate, detailing that this race isn't going to be about the issues and this race isn't going to be about my qualifications, but this is going to be a race where the insurance companies provide money, whether it be to my opponents or through political committees, to attack me. So I knew, separate and apart from being a first-time candidate, I was going to have to raise money to defeat those attacks, because to fight big insurance is to fight against really big, well-funded companies. And when you look at the donations that I've received, those donations are from people who have experienced me as a colleague in a profession for almost 16 years, who have watched me advocate for consumers, which is an extremely democratic principle, to fight for the little guy and girl against big corporations. So my political committee was a necessity because of the work and experience that I have, not for any other reason. So when you look at the donations received, we're not talking about big corporations. We're talking about mom and pop law firms and people in my industry that know the work that I've done, the fight that I have for consumers against big insurance companies.
Let me ask Clay Miller if he's soliciting money from the insurance industry.
I am not. I've never solicited a dime from the insurance industry. And I want to remain positive, so I'm only going to go through this part once. But I'm not as concerned about the Friends of Hillary Cassel PAC. I don't have a PAC myself, but I do understand that candidates have them in races, including Democratic candidates. I would not have one, but I understand. Hillary had another PAC. This is Florida Policyholders Cooperative. It was founded in 2019. She was the chair until February of 2021. It was formed from another PAC, which I believe was called Policyholders Advocacy Group. Between the two PACs, which Hillary was also the founder of, between the dissolved PAC and the PAC itself, Florida Policyholders Cooperative, that Hillary's law firm contributed $57,500, which is the largest single donor to this PAC. In the 2020 election cycle, just the ones that I could track and pin down, this PAC contributed $155,000 to the Republican Party of Florida and other Republican leadership PACs, including those associated with Joe Gruters, Wilton Simpson, Daniel Perez, and Paul Renner. She was not the chair after February 2021, but her contact is still on the page, and she still did provide funding to the PAC. And in this cycle, the PAC contributed $80,000 to 3 Republican PACs, mostly associated with Jimmy Petronis and Wilton Simpson. Those are just facts. That's not an attack. That's not Oppo research. I did all of that research myself on the Division of Elections. And that is not just, it may be part of the job in Tallahassee, but those aren't just influence points. Those are real dollars that pay for mailers and ads and canvassers. And this was in an election cycle where JJR lost by 34 votes, where we had 6 Democratic House candidates lose by less than 5 points. And we also had 3 pro-choice women incumbents lose their seats. And so this had all other Democratic activists were out there banging doors, real impact in losing Democratic seats in the state of Florida. And that makes it unlike all the other debates over who's a real Democrat in this election. These are direct donations in 2020 that affected races. And beyond the partisan sin of it all, again, I just think that trading that much money and influence in Tallahassee shows a comfort with a system that is irrecoverably broken.
Okay. Well, certainly there's a lot there to go through, but I want to ask Hillary Cassel to respond, particularly to this issue of, as Clay Miller says, your association with a PAC, or maybe more than one PAC, that generously gave to Republicans.
Sure, Stephen. And I'm really happy to talk about this. And I appreciate this opportunity because I was extremely disappointed to see this mailer over the weekend. You know, when we started this race, the 3 of us were friends. You know, we all serve on the Governmental Affairs Committee for the Chamber of Hollywood, which I'm the chair of. And I was really disappointed because I don't believe that this is Clay. But let me address. So I fight for everyday Floridians in Tallahassee, a very democratic principle against big insurance companies. And I don't make the rules. And I formed a political committee called Florida Policyholders Cooperative. There was an original name provided to the organization. Unfortunately, when the acronym was spelled out, it was a bad acronym. So we changed the name of the organization. This organization has a board of directors. This organization has a membership. This is not an organization solely run by Hillary Cassel. This is an organization of consumer advocates who are on the ground every single day fighting against big insurance companies who sadly control the narrative. Steve, you and your paper have been writing about this property insurance crisis for years. And there's been nobody in Tallahassee advocating for consumers, for consumer-centric reforms. And having been in the property insurance industry for 13 years, seeing the transformation as policy premiums continue to go up and coverages and policies continuing to go down, we needed to get to Tallahassee to tell our clients' stories. My clients are everyday Floridians that can't take off of work to fight the big insurance companies. So to answer the question with regards to the donations, what also has yet to be mentioned is the fact that this organization has donated over $165,000 to the Democratic caucus, to Democratic candidates. And why is that important? Because unfortunately, one of the problems with the Democratic Party is we are always on the right side of issues. And these issues that FPC fought for are democratic principles to fight for consumers. Most organizations, as a result, hold on, Steve, this is very important. Most organizations don't contribute to the Democratic Party because they know they can count on that vote. They know the Democrats are going to be there. And it was extremely important to FPC that our allies in Tallahassee, that the Democrats were provided with that support as well. I can't provide any information as to what the PAC's decisions for contributions are since I left the chairmanship when I announced my candidacy. I am no longer the chair, I am no longer on the board, and I no longer have a vote or attend the meetings where those decisions are made. But it is a board of directors with a lobbyist that those decisions are made. And let's be very clear, because this mailer is lies. This is a state-run political committee that can only engage in state election issues. To say that this political committee had anything to do with Donald Trump is an absolute mistruth and lie. To say that this political committee had anything to do with Ron DeSantis is an absolute mistruth and lie. Because if you follow it, there has never been a donation from this political committee to Ron DeSantis or his affiliated political committees or Donald Trump, because that would be a violation of the political committee's organization. So the reality is this is a political committee that was engaged and contributed to legislators of both parties on bipartisan economic issues who we hoped would support reforms that would stabilize a still to this day broken insurance market.
Okay. Before we go any further, I want to be ecumenical here. Todd Delmay, if you want to weigh in on this particular issue, this subject, did you see this Clay Miller mailing? Do you have any comments?
I did see it, and I mean, I can understand the corrosiveness of these things. I'm not entirely aware of the article that Hillary referenced from a few months ago, but it doesn't surprise me. There are outside interests that, no matter what, probably see three people who we all have very personal relationships with each other, and try to find ways to game the system in such a way. I find it terrible. I really wish this was focused on what we're doing. My focus in fundraising, like I said, has been purely on small dollar donors. I have almost 1,000 small dollar donations from hundreds and hundreds of individuals who are excited about me as a candidate, what I bring to the fight that is going on in Tallahassee to win back constitutional and civil rights, to stand up for everyday people, for affordability, to make sure that we are thinking about the healthcare and the real lives of every single Floridian, and that we are pushing forward to make sure that we are also building a bench for our party so that we can take back Florida, to turn it blue. Because a lot of these issues, as much as we would like to be, screaming louder than the next person, a lot of these things cannot be addressed if we do not take back control and we do not sit in a space where Democrats are constantly run over by Republicans. We have to work with them. We have to have relationships with them. We have to be able to fight loud. We also need to be able to fight quiet and build a real Florida that can, meet everyone's needs.
Okay. Clay, I'll let you respond, but tell me, first of all, just let's get something established on the record. We don't have it in front of us. You don't have a political committee. Did your campaign committee pay for the flyer that we're discussing here?
Yes, I did. And let me answer very briefly just two of the things that Hillary said in terms of this not being me or this being a negative mailer. Look, I have been on this campaign trail since last February in the community that I was born and raised in. I've been knocking doors since last April, and I have knocked on over 7,000 doors. I have fought in a positive and grassroots way this entire campaign. I have no association with the article that Hillary mentioned. And, this is a race where a lot of money is being spent. And it is, as a 28-year-old who works in public service, important that I get the facts out there and I don't get drowned out on TV. And I believe this is important information for the voters to know. And it is also far from the first negative thing in this race. The other point is, and this is the bigger point, the idea that saying that this path helped elect Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump is a lie. That is, I think, a fundamental and total misunderstanding of how these donations in Tallahassee work. These are secretive, untraceable donations. If you look at the expenditures of the PACs that received this money, they donate directly to the Republican Party of Florida. They donate to other Republican leadership groups affiliated with Trump and DeSantis. This is how it works. The money is funneled from one PAC to another with the sole intention of driving out turnout to help elect Republicans up and down the ticket, starting with Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. So I understand, Hillary being upset, but I think to say that this money didn't go to help elect those two individuals is just not true.
Steve,
Yes.
if I could real quickly. So first and foremost, as an attorney, I think evidence is important. And when you look at the mailer and you look at the only evidence that's submitted, and it says check the facts, and it brings you to transparencyusa.org, it brings you to a blank web page. It brings you to the front page of that election site. There's no citations. There's no way to fact check this. And I think it's important that the Sun Sentinel does, because you will not find a donation to Donald Trump, and you will not find a donation to the Florida GOP. There were donations made to House Majority, just like there were to Senate Victory to help get Democrats elected. And what's important to know is also, I have more Democratic endorsements from sitting legislators than either Mr. Miller or Mr. Delmay combined. People like Senator Geller, Representative Geller, who has held this seat, people like Leader Ben Diamond, Tina Polsky, Senator Berman, Senator Pizzo, and the list goes on and on and on. And these are people who have watched me in Tallahassee for 4 years fighting for democratic principles. I would not have received these endorsements if these people didn't know where I stand personally, Hillary Cassel, as a candidate.
Okay, Clay Miller, what should the voter make of the names she just rattled off are well-respected members of the Florida legislature and in the Democratic Party. How should voters filter that information that all these folks support Hillary?
We are not publicly vetted candidates like Charlie Crist or Jared Moskowitz. We are all first-time candidates for a down-ballot race. We do not know what information has been disclosed, and we do not know what these endorsers knew at the time that they made them. I think that all of us should have to be accountable to our records, including me, including Todd, and including Hillary. The AFL-CIO has endorsed me. SEIU Florida has endorsed me. As someone from a union background, I'm tremendously proud of that. But if there is something in my record that is concerning, that shows associations with anti-choice or anti-LGBTQ candidates, those endorsements are not a bulwark against that, as proud as I am of them. And the same goes for Equality Florida and Todd, or any endorsements in this race. So I think since we're all first-time candidates, we need to be vetted.
Thank you very much. Dan Sweeney, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions for everybody. Real quick, Mr. Delmay, in your opening statement, you said that you live in the district. Are you insinuating that your opponents do not live in the district?
No.
Okay. Clay Miller, in your opening statement, you said that the DeSantis administration is an embarrassment, and that it's causing young people to leave the state and old people to decide not to retire here. What evidence do you possibly have for that, given that the population of Florida is steadily increasing? maybe not at levels greater than before the pandemic, but at least comparable.
So we've actually seen in our bluer counties, there is still population growth in Florida, certainly on the west coast of Florida, in the villages. We've seen our population in Broward, Miami-Dade County, which are growing epicenters of economic development. Those have stagnated. And I think that Ron DeSantis's policies are frankly authoritarian. I think they're going to make things dangerous for the people who do live here already. And I think that that is going to start having tangible effects. Right now, Ron DeSantis is just laying the groundwork. And I believe when I talk about the future, I'm not talking about just the population growth in the last year. This is talking 10, 20, 30 years down the road. Once all these bans are in place, once all these laws that debase our ability to vote are implemented. So I think we do need to think in the long term on this.
So you're not saying that it's affected population growth, previously in the last year or two as these things have been passing, but that it will going forward. You can't really cite any evidence of that, obviously, because it's the future. But that's your prediction.
That is my prediction, and I believe it's an important voice to have in Tallahassee. I think that we need to be thinking about that. I think we need to elevate the perspective of people from our working class, younger people, that can go up there and advocate for the long term.
Okay. Hillary Cassel, speaking of citing things without evidence, you just mentioned that you can't fact check this political committee's spending. You go to it, you can't see any donations to friends of Ron DeSantis or what have you. But isn't that the point? I mean, the point of committees like this is to move money around, slosh it around so that you can't possibly trace where it goes.
No, my point, sorry, Mr. Sweeney. My point was when the mailer says Hillary's PAC, it doesn't state what PAC is being referenced. Is he referencing the political committee that was formed for purposes of my campaign? Is he speaking about Florida Policyholders Cooperative? So for somebody that's looking for the information to fact check it, he didn't provide the source. So the citation doesn't give anybody the ability to go in and say, wow, this political committee also gave $165,000 to Democratic allies. So it doesn't give anybody any information other than, lies and mistruths, and then doesn't guide them how to go about doing that. And it is a confusing process. So there was no guidance provided. And at no point, and I would like to make sure this is clear, I was not insinuating that this came from somebody other than Mr. Miller. It's clear on the face of it that it's from Mr. Miller's political campaign. But the point being, if there was evidence of this Trump check, where is it? It's not here. This doesn't give a person looking to check these facts that have been put in writing any information as to where they can go to see if this is accurate, and also see the contributions made by Florida Policyholders Cooperative to the Democratic Party to make sure that our allies were supported.
Okay, so I understand then that the mailer may conflate in voters' minds your campaign committee with your previous committees. I understand that. But as far as being able to trace from Florida policyholders any money that goes to friends of Ron DeSantis or what have you, isn't that the point of these committees, to send money to from one special interest to their committee, to another committee, to the committee to protect puppies and babies, which who can possibly disagree with that, and then that committee sends out all sorts of attack mailers, and the money's untraceable. I mean, that's
what I can tell you is the board of Florida Policyholders Cooperative made decisions about certain legislators that we believed would either be hearing issues related to property insurance that we could have conversations with that would be consumer centric, and how we can make sure these reforms don't hurt everyday Floridians or make it impossible to hold big insurance accountable when they do the wrong thing, which I see on a daily basis, everyday Floridians being taken advantage of. What you see is what the intent is as to where the check from FPC was written. That check is very clear. I have no control over what the next line of people do, but our checks went to legislators only, did not go to Ron DeSantis, and Governor DeSantis actually has to file solicitations if he's going to solicit to any of the PACs or obtain money from those PACs. And since 2016, our records indicate that the PACs that FPC made donations to in the hopes that they would support consumer-centered reforms on property insurance, Governor DeSantis has not filed any solicitations with regards to those PACs. So as far as we can see, the donations made and voted on by the FPC board have not made their way to DeSantis and definitely have not gone to Trump, because that would be a violation of the state of the forming documents of the state PAC.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
At the time, Hillary, at the time you took a leadership role at Florida Policyholders Cooperative, that was several years ago, it sounds like. Was the thought in your mind, one of these days I'm going to be a candidate for the Florida legislature?
Oh, Steve, that it couldn't be further from the truth. For a couple reasons. I'm sure you saw from my opening remarks in my candidate questionnaire, it's something I'm very proud of. But I was diagnosed with bipolar 2, over 12 years ago, at a time where conversations about mental health and work-life balance were not being had. And I was in a profession that prides itself on perfection, no room for error, in really the most complicated and difficult situations. And I was faced with the real possibility, with $160,000 in school debt, that I may have to leave the practice of law. But I'm a fighter, and I fought really hard to get healthy. And I built a reputation in my industry because I wanted to make sure that if I ever had a moment where I was going to need people to come to my defense, that I was going to have that. And that's why I have the ratings from all of the all of the peer review, and why I've been rated a top attorney year after year after year, because I proved that I'm really good at my job. And I knew that was going to be important. And when you receive a diagnosis, a mental illness, you don't envision yourself on a stage. I didn't envision myself ever revealing that secret, to be perfectly honest with you. So the thought of ever running for office really did not cross my mind until December of 2020, after spending 3 years in Tallahassee, watching this erosion year after year getting worse and worse.
Okay.
Knowing this is important, knowing I had the skill set, reading how democracies die, and knowing I needed to step up. So the thought of running for office was not something. I will also tell you, I'm the daughter of a former local elected official. I grew up in that house, and I swore I would never partake in this world. I decided that my public service would be best served elsewhere. I started my career here in Broward as an assistant state attorney, fighting for the people of the state of Florida. And this world was not on my radar because of the concerns that I had of sharing this big secret that I had about my mental health.
Okay. And you're the daughter of what former elected official?
So my mom, my hero, she was the second woman elected to the Board of Supervisors in Wellington before Wellington was even a city. She was one of the supervisors that voted to incorporate Wellington. And then eventually, because of her love for children and community, she became the director of Parks and Recreation and turned Wellington into a top 5 national parks and recreation program. So I grew up in a world of service to our community, community being number one. But I also knew what it was like to be in Publix, walking down the aisle and being stopped.
Okay.
I've
got a question for Clay Miller that relates to fundraising. Now, you've raised about $87,000. I checked a little while ago, and you've done that without having one of these soft money political committees, to your credit, Clay. But you've also received the $1,000 maximum donation allowed to a candidate. Here are some big names in the lobbying community. Matt Sacco gave you $1,000. Bernie Friedman gave you $1,000. Ron Book has given you $1,000. What do these guys get for their money?
I've worked very hard for Commissioner Furr over the last 5 years, really diligently on some very important issues facing our county. I think they have a lot of respect for me, and I think they have a lot of respect for Commissioner Furr. I want to be clear on something. They've gotten nothing. They've received no access. Absolutely not, and they never will. The reality is I have to, if I'm going to affect change in Tallahassee, I have to get elected. I'm the youngest person in this race. If you look at our financial disclosures, I have the least personal wealth in this race. I don't have wealthy friends. I went to South Broward High School. And so I did accept those donations, yes. But here's the broader point. It's very easy to lose yourself in Tallahassee. The money that's being exchanged, there's egos, there's soirees every night. It's easy to lose sight of the community while you're up there. So what I can promise, in addition to never having a PAC and not accepting lobbyist or LLC money once I'm elected, in addition to that, next June, after the session ends, even if I don't have an opponent looking at this history of the history of this district, I likely won't. I will be out there knocking doors, just like I did this whole campaign, just like I've done since I was 14 years old. That's where my passion lies. And let me tell you, when you are sweating and sunburning in the June sun, a year and a half before the election, when you have no opponent, it is a lot harder to lose yourself, as we see too often in Tallahassee. Thank you.
Dan Sweeney. Dan, you had your hand up. Turn your mic up.
Thank you. I had another quick question for Hillary. You said you've gone to Tallahassee in the last 4 years. Just for everyone's edification, can you say why that is? What exactly you do?
Sure. So I'm a consumer advocate. I thought it was important to provide, firsthand knowledge and experience and a different side of the presentation to what we see from our commissioner, which is that attorneys are the sole reason for this insurance crisis. But I also
sorry, I thought you were with any particular organization or anything like that.
I was up there with Florida Policyholders Cooperative.
Huh. Okay.
As well as other members of the board, came up as well. I founded that organization. That's an organization that I founded, that I felt there was a need for, that I organized an industry, that I truly believed that if we did not get to Tallahassee to share the stories, these horror stories that I fight for every single day about how insurance companies treat their consumers, nobody was telling that story. And we needed to get to Tallahassee to tell it. And we also needed to get to Tallahassee to talk about the reforms that were actually going to move the marketplace. Property insurance is extremely complicated. I spent a 13-year legal career, 13 out of my 16 years focused on this area of law. And what I started to realize was that our legislators, getting 15 minutes of time to explain something I've spent 13 years understanding, we need an expert in this area. This crisis is far from over.
I have an insurance related question. Dan, I'm sorry.
I just had a quick follow-up. You just said there nobody's telling that story, and you said in your opening that you bring a much needed experience here as a trial lawyer against insurance. On the flip side of that, you're saying that what the Democratic Party needs, the experience that they're lacking up there, is the experience of trial lawyers. Really? Because they right now have the outgoing Gary Farmer in the Senate, who was the head of the Florida Justice Association. Trial lawyers are not exactly an underrepresented special interest within the Democratic caucus. Why is your experience an experience that nobody has up there, and that, as a trial lawyer, that nobody else is offering?
Because I have an experience in property insurance, a focus on an area where we are in a crisis and have been for years. And this isn't the first time we've been here. We were here in 1993 after Hurricane Andrew. We were here in 2006 after the storms that wreaked havoc on the state in 2004 and 2005. And we're here again now. And property insurance is an extremely nuanced specialty area of law. So I think having the experience in this specific area right now is needed in Tallahassee. And let's be very clear. One of the reasons why I started FPC was to distinguish from Florida Justice Association. I went up to Tallahassee and FPC went to Tallahassee because reforms are necessary. Those reforms also included reforms that went against my own interest or my business's interest, because there are bad actors on my side of the aisle. I am proud to serve as the board on the board of directors and the former chair emeritus of the Federal Association of Insurance Reform. I chaired that property committee with Paul Handerhan at the helm, who is the single most expert in this particular field, because I believe that to solve this crisis, all stakeholders have to take accountability for their role in it. And I believe that includes lawyers and public adjusters and roofers. And I came to Tallahassee and FPC came to Tallahassee to make sure that story was told so we could pass reforms that closed the loopholes that were being taken advantage of. But what was frustrating and has frustrated me over the course of the last 4 years, watching an insurance commissioner who solely places the blame of a huge problem on a single industry, is why this problem hasn't been fixed. If you're not willing to challenge the insurance companies to find out why litigation is so high, then you're only looking at one side of the problem, and that's part of the issue, because people don't have the skill set in this particular area to push back with the fundamental foundational knowledge that I have, to push back on the commissioner of insurance, to push back on the insurance industry, because this is what I have dealt with solely for 13 years.
Hillary, like you, we're a big believer in transparency and campaign finance. Why did the Florida Policyholders Cooperative, if I have the name right there, why did that PAC give repeated big donations to David Ramba's consulting firm, a prominent lobbyist in Tallahassee? Why?
Sure.
Why him?
So Paul Handerhan, who is the president of the Federal Association of Insurance Reform, is also a lobbyist in Tallahassee, and he works for Ramba Consulting. So Paul Handerhan, who is quoted probably daily in every newspaper across the state when it comes to insurance reforms as the president of the Federal Association of Insurance Reform, is a lobbyist with Ramba Consulting. And Paul Handerhan is the lobbyist that works for Florida Policyholders Cooperative, because there is nobody that knows these issues more than Paul Handerhan and knows how to right this industry more than Paul.
And was Mr. Miller right in his assertion that the FPC gave campaign contributions to prominent Republicans Joe Gruters and Wilton Simpson?
So I don't have that detailed list in front of me, but I'm not here to skirt the issue. Florida Policyholders Cooperative, with its board, made donations to those individuals that we wanted to have conversations with about the consumer side of the issue. I remember several years ago, Senator Gruters is on the Banking and Insurance Committee for the Senate, having conversations with those individuals that sit on Senate Banking and Insurance is extremely important when you're advocating for everyday Floridians. And when you're going up against insurance companies, as an example, Heritage Insurance Company, all these insurance companies claiming insolvency.
Okay.
Steve, this is important.
I cannot let you monopolize this conversation, please. There's 3 candidates here, with all due respect. I want to ask Todd Delmay a question. Todd said in his candidate questionnaire that one of the ways to fix, and Hillary, I'd very much like your response to this as well, and Clay. Todd Delmay said one of the ways to fix the insurance crisis in the state is to raise the cap on replacement value of a home from $700,000 to $1 million. Right, Todd?
Yes.
And why is that a good idea?
Well, I think a lot of homeowners have seen the home that they may have purchased many years ago because of inflation and because of everything that's going on in the economy. The people who are coming in and buying homes at astronomical prices that we have never seen before, whether they're coming from out of town because they're moving here, or they are coming in and buying them for Airbnbs, whatever it might be. And people are seeing their home value going up so substantially that their insurance is being canceled, which then forces them to go out and to find much more expensive policies. So we need to have a more comprehensive plan that helps homeowners. We're all seeing those increases.
Clay Miller, what do you say to that?
I do agree, and that is one of the suggestions I listed in my questionnaire that we should expedite the study. And if we find this gives relief to middle-class families, we should raise that eligibility cap to $1 million. I think the biggest problem in the first issue to address, though, once again in Tallahassee, is transparency. So much of the insurance issue is based on claims, no pun intended, that the insurance industry makes, that these are frivolous lawsuits, that there's false roof damage claims. Had somebody tell me when I was knocking on doors that they had to replace all the aluminum wire in their house because citizens told them that was a danger. We need to see actual empirical data. We need a study that shows data. We need a study that produces the financial autopsies. And until we have that information available, we need to consider freezing rates for all residents. And if not, we need to freeze them for our most vulnerable residents like seniors and first-time homeowners.
Okay. Let me open the floor to my two colleagues. We've been
Steve,
at this.
are you
Yes,
gonna let me answer that?
Yes, go ahead. Yes, go ahead. Yep.
So I think this is where my experience and is going to be highlighted. So what Todd is proposing is that Citizens raise its cap for insurance from homes that are valued at $700,000 to $1 million. What does that do? You all know that puts more policies in Citizens. What we already currently have is Citizens, which is not a risk-based entity that does not have to evaluate and incorporate into their premium amounts the cost of reinsurance, which is anywhere between 40 and 49% of what homeowners pay in their premium. So when Citizens writes a policy, they don't have to factor into their premium huge expenses that the private market does. Citizens was intended always to be the insurer of last resort. And because we have not allowed Citizens to remain competitive against the private marketplace, people have the option of going to Citizens in lieu of the private marketplace. So we have an insurer of last resort that is not the last resort, and actually people are incentivized to go there. Well, what happens if Citizens can't pay out all of its liabilities? The current policyholders will be assessed up to 45% of their premium. If that's not enough to cover the liabilities, then all policyholders except for healthcare and workers' compensation will be assessed a 2% assessment. And if that doesn't cover the liabilities, then it goes to 10%. So what we're doing is we're allowing people who come to the state, whether they be corporations, whether they be second homeowners, whether they be rental properties, to increase Citizens' liability to $1 million, which is going to incentivize people to take out premiums at a lower rate because Citizens actuarially doesn't have to factor in the most expensive cost of insurance, which is reinsurance. And what we are doing is creating on the backs of Floridians a crisis that if we get hit with a storm, like an Andrew, will crush Citizens and will force policyholders in this state to carry that burden. So raising it from 700,000 to $1 million only puts more policies in the hands of Citizens rather than the private marketplace, because Citizens has not been held to be able to be a risk-based insurance company where where they can compete and where people won't be incentivized to go to the insurer of last resort.
Okay, let me just thank you very much, Hillary. Let me say parenthetically, it was reported by Politico today that Charlie Crist, the leading Democratic candidate for governor, is a proponent of the sort of thing that Todd is describing. So you're in the position theoretically of running on a ticket in November where the standard bearer on your ticket is advocating the very thing here that you're criticizing.
I think there are other reforms that are going to move the needle. I think increasing the amount of value for Citizens to write policies isn't the right reform to move the needle. And the moving the needle means putting money back into the pockets of consumers so rates don't continue to increase, as well as figuring out ways to ensure insurance companies in the state remain solvent. And we've got to solve that problem through the reinsurance marketplace. So adding to citizens' policies is not the right direction. You know, I would love to have a conversation with Governor or former Governor Christ about that. But I think there are other reforms that can be discussed that can help solve those two immediate crises without putting more policy and liability on the state of Florida.
Okay, let me do this. We've been at this well over an hour. First of all, just a second, Clay. First of all, Dan Sweeney and Martin Dykeman and I have sat through all of these and we've enjoyed it immensely. But you three are among the best prepared candidates we have seen. And I know this is a contentious race, but keep your poise as you have been. And I think the best thing to do at this point is I'm going to allow each of you to make about a 1-minute closing statement. You've gotten a lot more time to interact with us this morning than you'll get in a lot of legislative committee meetings in Tallahassee. Take my word for it. And so let's do this in alphabetical order. And I'll start with you, Hillary Cassel. 1 minute.
Perfect. Thank you again for this opportunity. Thank you, Clay and Todd, for always a lively debate. I think right now what we need is experience. We need somebody with a skill set to push back against the Republicans. Steve, you've also seen me testify on other issues. A huge issue, which is extremely important right now, is our fundamental rights and a woman's right to make decisions about her own body. And you quoted me because within 30 seconds, I got through the noise of that committee. Giving 30 seconds because of the skill set that I have as a woman, as a mother. I'm a mother by choice, for choice. I have the ability to speak from experience. I have been fighting for Floridians and this state through a legal career, an established, recognized, respected legal career for over 15 years. And not only am I experienced in a really complicated subject, I've also proven through your own quote of me, my skill set in other areas, protecting a woman's right to choose, fighting for our fundamental rights and our liberties. I am the best candidate that on day one knows this process. I have sat through hundreds of hours of committees, drafted legislation, worked with legislators across the aisle to protect everyday Floridians. And on day one, I do this job and I do it well.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Democratic principles.
Thank you. Todd Delmay, you have the floor. 1 minute, please.
Well, thank you as well for this opportunity. I've been a leader in business, in the travel industry, in civil rights and environmental advocacy, in advancing healthcare access for city employees, and in speaking truth to power. I've been showing up for my community and in Democratic circles for a long time. As I mentioned, I'm funded by nearly 1,000 small dollar donations by hundreds and hundreds of people who believe that I have the right skill set, diverse experience, and proven track record to meet this moment. And the conversations I'm having with voters are reinforcing that. I'm the only candidate to have a win under my belt as large as same-sex marriage and the constitutional and civil rights that it entails. Beyond just understanding the process, I understand my community. We need a fighter for District 101. I've been fighting for my own rights and the rights of my family, and now I'm ready to fight for my community, and I look forward to serving in the Florida legislature.
Thank you, Todd, very much. Clay Miller, you have the floor for 1 minute.
Thank you so much. Our community is crying out for help, both for the short term and for the long term. We need someone with experience, I agree, but with experience across multiple legislative subjects, not just expertise on one. We need someone who has worked intimately with our port and airport, which are our main economic engines in this district. We need someone who understands how to build workforce housing along our new commuter rail line in Broward County. We need someone who understands why we can't let them take away flow control from our solid waste or impose renter fees that are a tax on poor folks. I promise I don't tell this story to suck up. But my parents only met because of the South Florida Sun Sentinel. My dad was on the cover of Showtime in September 1982, nearly exactly 40 years ago. And he walked into the jewelry store where my mom was working, and she looked at the paper and looked at him and said, "Is that you?" And that's how they met. And I don't think in that moment they could have imagined that 40 years later they would have a son and he'd be here today. It's easy to get caught up in the negativity and the stress of a campaign, but I never, ever forget where I came from or what my community needs. I think Tallahassee would be fortunate to have a young person who is committed to fighting for our state. And thank you, Solo, for ruining my opening statement. A young person that is committed to fighting for our state, that could address our needs, that works with constituents, but also has a long-term plan to build power. I think that's a unique voice in Tallahassee, and I'd be honored to be that voice.
Your mic's off.
All right. Thank you to all three of you and Solo as well. Thanks so much for being here this morning. Best of luck to all three of you. Thank you very much. So long.